Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabesty here. This is the raid guide for Normal and Heroic Beastlord Darmac. And this encounter is overall fairly simple. It's probably a little bit more complicated, a little bit more difficult than Gruul, but for the most part if you can defeat one, you can probably defeat the other. Most of this fight revolves around focusing on many adds that will spawn throughout the encounter while dealing with basic mechanics from Darmac, and then as he gets lower, he will hop on one of his prime beasts, riding those for a while until they're killed, and then take over their basic abilities for the rest of the encounter. So let's get started. For your raid composition, it probably doesn't matter a whole lot. There are some arguments to be made for bringing classes more capable of doing area of effect damage. So balanced druids, warriors, stuff like that, DPS warriors. Also, dot classes are quite useful for dealing with the spears throughout the fight. In terms of healing, you probably just want standard number. About one healer for every 5 players should be plenty. You could also go up to 1 extra healer because I don't think there's a berserk on this encounter. I think it's more about the room getting flooded. But if there is a berserk, it's unknown to me at this time. It's probably pretty long. So Darmac has 2 basic abilities he'll use throughout the fight. The first, and probably most important in the entire encounter, is Heavy Spear. He will target 2 random range members, well possibly 3 if your raid's large enough, but 2 for around 20 people. And this will show a small little white circle underneath those targeted players, and just a second or 2 later, a spear will land in that location. The spear itself does moderate physical damage to everyone within 25 yards, but more importantly, if the targeted player does not move out of the spear location in time, they will be pinned down to that location. And this will prevent all actions, basically be stunned until the spear itself is killed. So, best course of action is to have your ranged players spread around throughout most of the fight, but particularly for this sort of mechanic. Watch their feet closely when the timer's about to come up. Make sure you sidestep the spear if it's near you. And if you avoid it, you don't have to really worry about the spear too much. Spears that aren't pinning someone can just be killed over time very slowly. So this is where dot classes and incidental area of effect damage will be handy. However, if a spear is pinning someone, make sure they communicate quickly in voice chat so that that spear can be killed off so that they can rejoin the fight. The other main ability that Darmac will use throughout the fight is Call of the Pack. And this will summon a series of 6 small beasts from the cubby that is initially empty when you enter the room. So it's marked in blue for us. So these beasts always come from that cubby, and they're very easy. They're not very dangerous. You just have to deal with them frequently. So one of your tanks will need to pick them up, bring them into melee range of the boss. Everyone cleaves them down. Pretty simple. Nothing fancy about it. So as mentioned at the start, the primary gimmick here is that throughout the fight, Darmac will mount one of the 3 cubbied prime beasts and use their basic abilities from that point forward in the fight. So the prime beast's phasing occurs at 85% health for Darmac, then again at 65, and then one more at 45%. Now when he mounts these beasts, you will then kill the beast itself while he's mounted on it. You won't be able to attack Darmac during that time. And then once you kill the beast, and he's retained their ability essentially, then you're back on Darmac and you start from wherever his health left off. So you just keep transitioning through these health levels, dealing with the beast that he grabs, going to the next one, and so on until the fight is over. So the first prime beast that you're going to want to activate is Cruelfang. So he'll start off in the green position there, and this is kind of near where you're going to be tanking anyway, so it makes it simple. It's also because his additional abilities are probably the easiest to deal with throughout the majority of the fight, since you're going to have to deal with those much longer than you would some of the later Prime Beast abilities. Now the main mechanic from Cruelfang is Rend and Tear, and this is used very frequently. Cruelfang or Darmac, after he gains the ability, will target a random ranged player, again ranged DPS or healer, leap to their location, do a Rend and Tear attack, which hits that player and anyone within 7 yards, causing a stacking physical dot. He will then jump back to the tank position, whichever tank has threat at the time, and do a second rend and tear, again within 7 yards. And this process just happens very frequently. Because the dot is stacking, ranged have an easy time because they can spread around, and generally just randomness will dictate that they won't get selected multiple times in a row, and it should only hit the one person it's targeting. However, melee have a more difficult time. Because when he jumps back on the tank, if melee don't move, they will just keep getting stacks of this debuff. They need to be very aware of it. So there are 2 ways to handle it, but I would recommend just doing both just to get in the habit of playing it safe. The first and most important thing is when the tank that's tanking sees the boss jump away for the first run and tear leap, that tank should back up a few steps or run away themselves, so that when the boss jumps back to them, he's automatically a few yards away from where he normally started. And this should make it a little bit safer for melee to get out of that 7-yard radius of the second rend and tear. Likewise, melee should do the same, but in the opposite direction. So essentially, melees are always going to be attacking from the back. So the tank moves backwards from their position, melee move backwards from their position, and this should easily create that 7-yard gap that you need. The important thing is just to make sure that the stacks don't get too high on any particular melee DPS, because particularly in the later stages of the fight, it can be difficult to deal with all the damage that's going on with this dot, stacking up on people. The second ability from Cruelfang is pretty minor. He will gain a Savage Howl buff, which essentially is just an enrage mechanic, increases his attack speed. So make sure somebody, removes that with a soothe or whatever it is. So Ironcrusher is probably who you want to activate second. Now you can do Ironcrusher first and Cruelfang second, but it has to be one or the other. The main thing is that you don't want to do Dreadwing before the third one. He has to be the third activated. So Ironcrusher, his primary ability, the one he uses most frequently, is Stampede. And this is very similar mechanically to the Rend and Tear. So positioning that you were using for that will still apply here. Basically, all the ranged and healers need to spread out 15 yards apart. And when he uses Stampede, he will target a random ranged player and start to rush toward them. However, in this case, he will immediately knock back all melee and do some damage to all the melee players. And then he will hit the targeted ranged player as well as anyone within 15 yards of them and doing damage to them. So it's kind of the reverse order of the Rend and Tear. It hits the melee clump first and then the ranged clump. However, in the case of Stampede, because it's not a stacking debuff, your melee don't need to actually worry about avoiding it. It's just a thing that needs to be healed through, essentially. So, but the range themselves can just stay spread out enough to avoid it most of the time. The second major ability from Ironcrusher is Tantrum. And this is just a pulsing area of effect damage ability that will hit everyone in the raid for moderate physical damage over time. And it's not a huge amount of damage, so you don't need to generally blow cooldowns for it. It's fairly frequent, but it is enough combined with screwing up other mechanics that it can be a problem. So in the later portions of the phase, particularly when you're at the very end, there's a lot of fire and whatnot from Dreadwing. That's when you really want to use your raid cooldowns and whatnot during Tantrum. But early on, when you're first seeing it, it's not going to be a big deal. Just heal through the damage as you normally would. The final ability from Ironcrusher is Crush Armor. And this is, of course, a tank swap mechanic. Reduces armor. It's a stacking debuff, so you want to swap around 2 or 3 stacks. Pretty simple. You may have noticed that there's also the stacking Rend and Tear debuff from Cruelfang. And this, of course, is a dot, but if you have to choose one or the other to base your tank swaps on, it's going to be better to use Crush Armor as your basis rather than the dot stack from Rend and Tear, because reducing physical armor is far more significant for tank survivability than a bit of extra dot damage, essentially. So when Darmac reaches 45%, he will finally mount Dreadwing as the last Prime Beast. And as mentioned, because Darmac retains the special abilities from the Prime Beasts that he's activated up to that point, this is why you want to have Dreadwing as the last, because his abilities are by far the most dangerous. The first of which is Inferno Breath, which you see right there. This is essentially a series of 3 pulsing breaths that he will use, targeting a random direction around the room. These breaths have a massive cone. The radius of the cone, or essentially the angle of it, is much wider than the graphic appears. So you just need to be aware of that and really do your best to sidestep it quickly. If you can manage to stay somewhat close to the boss as a ranged player or healer, it will help, but you have to be aware that you can't be so close that you're cleaving, stacking dot like rend and tear or something. But if you're within 15 yards of other players, that's probably okay, because you can afford to take a couple extra hits from the stampede charge. You just can't afford the extra dots from rend and tear. But the closer you can be to the boss, the easier it will be to sidestep the breath attack during this final phase. The other important thing is that the breath will stack a dot on anyone it hits, but this dot is a magic and debuff, so it can be dispelled by healers. So make sure you're quick to dispel higher stacks if players can't avoid it for some reason. The other ability that he gains is Conflagration, which is just like the standard version of this ability you've seen all the way back from General Drakosith and in Upper Blackrock Spire. Basically, it will target 2 or 3 random ranged players. I think it's ranged only. It might be able to target melee, actually. So let's just assume 2 players that aren't tanks. And they will sort of run around in a daze for about 8 seconds, taking damage and dealing damage to anyone nearby. So the best thing you can do is have your healers dispel this quickly. And if you dispel it, they'll only get a tick or 2 off, and it won't really be a dangerous thing. The other main thing is he will light up a lot of things on fire during this phase. So these spears that were normally just sitting there not doing anything will now shoot out little waves of fire in random directions. So because of this, it's important that you keep the spear numbers low going into this phase. And when new ones spawn, kill them off relatively quickly. You don't necessarily have to focus them. It's not that much extra damage. But players that are nearby should just be aware that the fire is coming out. And players that have dots and AE damage to take the spears down should try to do so quickly. He will also light the corpses of the lesser beasts on fire fairly frequently. So this is just really up to your tanks to watch for that. I think the best method to use, which we didn't really get enough attempts in to actually have to try it, but seems to be the best thing to do, would simply be kill a set of lesser beasts, then move the boss 5 or 10 yards in one direction along a wall, and repeat this process over and over. And that way your melee are always safe. They don't have to worry about it, neither do your tanks. There's also a stacking debuff on the tanks that should be mitigated. So you'll want to swap just when the existing stack drops off the current or the old tank, do a tank swap and just repeat that process. Pretty simple. So overall, this phase is by far the most difficult. There's a lot of potential damage that can come out here, particularly once Darmac drops off and starts using Tantrum, because that's a sizable amount of raid damage that can happen along with the breath. He basically does a breath called Shrapnel, but it's the same thing as the breath attack before. So don't be afraid to use all your survival cooldowns, and particularly your DPS cooldowns in this phase. You want to Bloodlust after Darmac drops off Dreadwing, because that's when he has all his abilities back, and he'll be the most difficult that he has been throughout the fight. So once he's dropped off, you've cleared out the recent spears, and maybe even killed the Lesser Beast pack that just came out, then you want to blow all your cooldowns and burn them down at that point. And if you do that, you should have a pretty easy time getting them down if you've made it to that phase. It's not significantly difficult, like I said, it's just you have to do things in the proper order and avoid the mechanics that you can. So that is the raid guide for Normal and Heroic Beastlord Darmac. As always, good luck, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. If you're so inclined, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. Maybe if you click that button hard enough, that Franzok and Hansgar animation might actually start moving. It's tough to tell, but give it a shot.